Okay, now we're going to get into chapter 21. This chapter is longer than the others, and it has a tremendous amount of detail and a lot of plot information. I really hope you guys will read this chapter completely instead of just grabbing some of these annotations, because it is really pretty exciting, and a lot of really important things happen, and there's a lot of historical reference here. So in the beginning, first of all, notice the title, Echoing Footsteps. This should remind you of the reference to echoes back in chapter 6 when Lucy and Dr. Manette had first settled in London. There's a hint that, there's going to be echoes of a bigger type coming soon, and that was a reference to the revolution, and that's what's going to be happening here. So, a wonderful corner for echoes. It has been remarked, that corner where the doctor lives. So this is referring back to chapter 6. Always busy. This talks about Lucy, who is keeping her family together. She's the golden thread which binds her husband and her father and herself. So, this could be a quiz question, I suppose, that Lucy is the golden thread. She's been referred to that before. But she's now thinking about the footsteps of just passing time. So this first reference to footsteps is not the revolution. It's more just that time is passing. And the first thing that Lucy worries about is having a child. She's at that point where she wants to have a child. And it says here, there was something coming in the echoes, something light, afar, and scarcely audible yet, that stirred her heart too much. Fluttering hopes and doubts, hopes of a love as yet unknown to her, doubts of her remaining upon earth to enjoy that new delight. So this is a reference to the fact that, first of all, she's excited about having a child and becoming a mother, but on the other hand, she's worried about dying. Mothers frequently died in childbirth during this period. So it's like a legitimate concern that, if she got pregnant, that she might not live to be a mother to her child. And it says here, among the echoes then there would arise the sound of footsteps at her own early grave. So she's thinking about, oh my gosh, what if I died? Thoughts of the husband who would be left so desolate and who would mourn for her so much swelled to her eyes and broke like waves. So this is another simile, just describing her deep feelings and fears about her own mortality. So what ends up happening is she does have a child, little Lucy. So her first child is a daughter, Lucy. And it says that in this shady house, the divine friend of children, to whom in her troubles she had confided hers, seemed to take her child in his arms as he took the child of old and made it a sacred joy to her. So this is like saying that young Lucy is blessed by God, that God is protecting her as God protects all children. Then there's another reference to that the fact that there's another child. First, we see that Charles Darnay is still doing well as a tutor. Her father is in good health. Miss Pross is an unruly charger. She is, taking care of everything in the house. Everybody's good. Everyone's happy. Everyone's working. But then it says, even when there were sounds of sorrow among the rest, they were not harsh or cruel. Even when golden hair like her own lay in a halo on a pillow round the worn face of a little boy. So this is her second child. And he said with a radiant smile, "Dear Papa and Mama, I am very sorry to leave you both and to leave my pretty sister, but I am called, I must go." This is so sad. The little boy is going to die, but it also is kind of funny the way this is written. It's just like, what child would say such a thing? It's just Dickens being very melodramatic. But it does make sense that she would lose a child, because just like it was common for mothers to die in childbirth, it was also very common for children to die. I think it was like 50% mortality rate or something for children during this time period. So this child does die. His name is George. So the two children, Lucy and George dies. These are the details you want to keep in mind from this. And then it goes on to describe Lucy, young Lucy growing up, how she plays with her dolls, and how she chatters in the tongues of the two cities that were blended in her life. So she is bilingual. She speaks both French and English. The echoes rarely answer to the actual tread of Sydney Carton. So here's Sydney. Some half dozen times a year at most. So remember, he said he would come by 4 times a year. Well, apparently he's coming by 6 times a year. He claimed his privilege of coming in uninvited and would sit among them through the evening as he had once done often. He never came there heated with wine. And one other thing regarding him was whispered in the echoes, and that is that the children love him. So the children really take to him, and that this is a detail that could be on a quiz question. And in fact, when George is about to die, he says, "Poor Carton, kiss him for me." So there's something about Sydney Carton, he's just a gentle person, and the children like him. Mr. Stryver, we get a little update on him. His character has not changed. He shoulders his way through the law like some great engine forcing itself through turbid water. This is a reference to the Industrial Revolution, to the steam engine. And then there's a reference again to Sydney kind of being swamped by Stryver, that he has no choice but to continue being the jackal and serving Mr. Stryver. It also gives us this detail that Stryver was rich. He had married a florid widow with property and 3 boys who had nothing particularly shining about them but the straight hair of their dumpling heads. So he does get married. He takes the advice he gave to Sydney and marries somebody with property. So we can also think to ourselves that, a woman who is widowed with 3 children would be desperate for a husband, someone to help her share the load. And so this is the kind of person who would be willing to marry him because he is such sort of a difficult person to spend time with. There's another detail here when Lucy and Darnay headed out for their honeymoon way, way back. Stryver had given them 3 lumps of bread and cheese for their matrimonial picnic, which was rejected. I'm sure they were like, "Oh no, thanks. We have enough." Because it was not necessarily the loveliest of gifts when you consider that Mr. Lorry gave them silver. And another thing that he does is Mr. Stryver tells Mrs. Stryver stories about Lucy Darnay, and he says that that she tried to catch him, and on the diamond cut diamond arts in himself, which had rendered him not to be caught. So he totally flips the script here. Instead of saying that he had hoped to marry her, he says that she had hoped to marry him, and this is referring to how witty and cunning he is. He manages to avoid it, which is so conceited. So this whole first, 2 pages is just describing kind of an update on all the characters in England. And we're at the point now where little Lucy is 6 years old. It does talk about how her father had told her that he found her more devoted to him married, if that could be, than single. So this is a reference to Dr. Manette saying to Lucy that he can't believe that she's able to be so loving to all of them. "What is this magic secret, my darling, of your being everything to all of us?" Dr. Manette says this. I sometimes feel like these are the kind of quotes that could pop up on a quote ID test. So now we're heading into a lot of transition into what's happening in France. But there were other echoes from a distance that rumbled menacingly. It's now Lucy's 6th birthday, so she actually is turning 6. And they began to have an awful sound as of a great storm in France with a dreadful sea rising. Here are some key details. On a night of mid-July, 1789, so 1789, mid-July, Mr. Lorry comes in late, and he's very he's very upset and stressed. He says, I should have had to pass the night at Tellson's. He was worried he wasn't going to be able to leave the bank. They're having a run on the bank. And what it means to have a run on the bank is that everybody wants their money out. He's saying that there is such an uneasiness in Paris that we have actually had a run of confidence upon us, which means that all the people in France, because remember, Tellson's has a bank in Paris and a bank in London. All the people in Paris want their money out of Tellson's. They're taking their money out, and they want it all sent to the England branch. So there's suddenly all this business going on, and Mr. Lorry doesn't understand why. And Darnay's like, well, that's not a good sign. Clearly it's not. So Mr. Lorry really can't figure out what's going on. He's very stressed. He asks Lucy if there's still tea available. When he says he's asking if the tea board is still there, he means like, is there tea? Are there scones or like little things to nibble on? And Dr. Manette offers to play backgammon with him, hoping to maybe calm him down. And Mr. Lorry's too upset to play backgammon. He can't do it. So he has tea. He tries to reassure himself that at least everybody in London is safe. The precious child is safe in bed and sleeping. Everything is safe and well, he tells himself. He says, let's sit quietly together and hear the echoes about which you have your theory. So this is referring to Lucy, Mom Lucy, not child Lucy, that she has what she calls as a fancy. And Mr. Lorry says, a fancy that, okay, they are very numerous and very loud, though, are they not? Only hear them. And then here's what's actually going on. Headlong mad at dangerous footsteps to force their way into anybody's life. Footsteps not easily made clean if once stained red. And footsteps raging in Saint Antoine far off as the little circle sat in the dark London window. Saint Antoine had been that morning a vast dusky mass of scarecrows heaving to and fro, with frequent gleams of light above the billowy heads where steel blades and bayonets shone in the sun. A tremendous roar arose from the throat of Saint Antoine, and a forest of naked arms struggled in the air like shriveled branches of trees in a winter wind, all the fingers convulsively clutching at every weapon or semblance of weapon that was thrown up from the depths below, no matter how far off. So this is the beginning of just a tremendous amount of figurative language, uses of literary devices to create so much tension about the revolution in France. So we have personification, the billowy heads with the steel blades, the throat of Saint Antoine, similes. It's just a lot of really vivid description here. It talks about muskets are being distributed, cartridges and powder, every weapon that you can imagine, iron, wood, knives, axes, pikes. It describes this building violence as a whirlpool of boiling waters, has a center point, and so all this raging circled around Defarge's wine shop. So this is a simile. Defarge's wine shop is like a whirlpool of boiling waters with the center point. And remember, he is like the sort of beginning or the home of the revolutionary planning. And every human drop in the cauldron has a tendency to be sucked towards the vortex where Defarge himself, already begrimed with gunpowder and sweat, issued orders, issued arms, thrust this man's back, dragged this man forward, disarmed one to arm another, etc. So he is in charge. He is having his moment. So clearly, he is going to live to see the revolution come to pass. So he starts, shouting out orders, Jacques 1, Jacques 2, Jacques 3. He's asking, where is his wife? Sure enough, she is knitting. And then off they go to the Bastille. So, with a roar that sounded as if all the breath in France had been shaped into the detested word, the living sea rose, wave on wave, depth on depth, and overflowed the city to that point. Alarm bells ringing, drums beating, the sea raging and thundering on its new beach, the attack began. Double ditches, double drawbridge, massive stone walls, 8 great towers, cannon, muskets, fire and smoke. So just notice here, we have a lot of repetition and listing of all the things that are happening. We have alliteration coming here and there in various places, just the repetition of those consonant sounds. It creates a lot of energy in this writing. And then here we have Madame Defarge. So here's what she's going to do. To me, women, so she calls all the women together. We can kill as well as the men when the place is taken. So as soon as the men actually break into the prison, they can help kill. And to her, with a shrill, thirsty cry, trooping women variously armed, but all armed alike in hunger and revenge. So, again, the listing: cannon, muskets, fire and smoke. Still, the deep ditch, the single drawbridge, the massive stone walls, and the 8 great towers. This is describing the Bastille prison. Slight displacements of the raging sea made by the falling wounded, flashing weapons, blazing torches, smoking wagon loads of wet straw, hard work at neighboring barricades in all directions, shrieks, volleys, execrations, bravery without stint. It just goes on and on and on. And it is like kind of goosebump to read this. Like, it is like, oh my God, like this is really intense. So there's a reference here. Oh, and they've now been storming the Bastille for 4 hours. That's an important detail too. And suddenly there's a white flag from within the fortress. So that indicates that the guards are beginning to surrender, that they know they don't have a chance. So in they go, and they start grabbing those guards and releasing those prisoners. Let the prisoners go, grab the records, find the secret cells, find the instruments of torture. This is all the peasants screaming and yelling as they run through the prison. The prisoners is the cry you hear most often. And then here what happens is Defarge finds one of the guards, and he separates him from the rest, and he says to him, "Show me the North Tower, quick." "I will, if you will come with me, but there is no one there." And Defarge says, "What is the meaning of 105 North Tower? Quick." And then the guard says, "Well, the meaning," he's confused. And Defarge says, like, "Is this an actual person or is it a place? Like, was 105 actually like identifying Dr. Manette, or was it the actual cell he was in?" And the guard said, "It is a cell." So 105 North Tower is a cell. It's the name. It's the number of the cell that Dr. Manette was in. And Defarge says, "Show it to me." So just remember, Monsieur Defarge was the servant of Dr. Manette. So of course he wants to see where the doctor had been imprisoned for so long. And so the other Jacques 1, Jacques 2, and Jacques 3 go along, make sure this guard doesn't have any monkey business in mind. So they all link arms, up they go. The turnkey is the guard, and they go up all the way to the top of the North Tower. Now, one thing that I do want to point out, everything about this Bastille really that's being described here is true. It did have 8 towers. It was located in the exact place where there's a memorial today. It did not have one North Tower. It had 2 North Towers. So this is a bit of a fictionalization here to have like this one tower, but it's a way of just setting Dr. Manette as a prisoner into a more of a special sort of location, symbolic of just all the worst of suffering that some of these prisoners experienced. So they get up there, and the guard opens the door, and he says, "Here it is, 105 North Tower." So here's how it's described. There was a small, heavily grated, unglazed window high in the wall with a stone screen before it so that the sky could be only seen by stooping low and looking up. And I'm remembering how Dr. Manette said he would look at the moon and imagine sectioning it into sort of little squares and like horizontal and vertical lines. There was a small chimney, heavily barred across a few feet within. There was a heap of old feathery wood ashes on the hearth. There was a stool and a table and a straw bed. There were 4 blackened walls and a rusted iron ring in one of them. So Defarge says, pass that torch slowly along these walls. So when they say a torch, they mean like a fire. It's not like it's a flashlight. It's like a little burning sort of I don't know, torch, I guess is the best way to describe it. But they're using fire to see. They don't have like an electric light or anything, or a battery light. Stop, look here, Jacques. And they see the initials AM. So these are the kind of things that show up on quiz questions. AM stands for Alexandra Manette. So that was Dr. Manette's first name. And then he wrote poor physician. And it was he, without doubt, who scratched a calendar on this stone. What is that in your hand? A crowbar? Give it to me. So he asks for a crowbar, and Defarge starts trying to sort of pry open the grate that's sort of blocking the little chimney. And he says, hold the light higher. He says, rip open that bed and search the straw. Hold the light higher. He's looking for any evidence of maybe something that Dr. Manette would have left in that prison cell. So he crawls upon the hearth, which is where the little chimney is, and peering up the chimney, struck and prized at its sides with a crowbar and worked at the iron grating. In a few minutes, some mortar and dust came dropping down, which he averted his face to avoid, and in it, and in the old wood ashes, and in a crevice in the chimney into which his weapon had slipped or wrought itself, he groped with a cautious touch. Nothing in the wood, nothing in the straw, nothing. So they don't find anything. Let us collect them together in the middle of the cell. So they pull all the dust in the old rotten wood together in the middle of the cell, and they set it on fire with their torch. Stooping again to come out of the low arch, they left it burning. So they leave the cell and they leave the fire. So then they run back downstairs, where all of Saint Antoine is clamorous to have its wine shop keeper foremost in the guard upon the governor, who had defended the Bastille and shot the people. Okay, so this would have been the person in charge of the Bastille. All the peasants want Monsieur Defarge to be the one who is guarding him, because he's the prize. He's the one they want to torture, because he's the one who was in charge of the prison. So I just made a note here so you can remember. The crowd wants Defarge to guard him. And the reference to the one steady figure, that would be Madame Defarge. She says, oh, there's my husband. See, there he is. So when he gets there, the crowd starts killing the governor. Rain of stabs and blows fell heavy, was so close to him when he dropped dead under it that suddenly animated, she put her foot upon his back, on his neck, and with her cruel knife, long and ready, hewed off his head. Okay, I apologize for this little blurring of my ink here, but what happens is the crowd basically, kills the guard, or the governor in charge of the prison. And as soon as he's completely beaten to death, Madame Defarge uses her knife and cuts off his head. So that's the beginning of a lot more of that to come. Then they take his mutilated body with his head cut off to the Hotel de Ville. This is like the hotel that the peasants take for their sort of ground zero, like where they're going to meet and where they're going to start torturing all the people that they capture. And they put the dead body of the governor there, as a reminder to everybody of what's to come. The Hotel de Ville is no longer there, but there is a commemorative plaque or something, or like some sort of statue that shows where it used to be. So this is an important destination. We're going to be, a lot of things are going to happen at the Hotel de Ville going forward. So then after they've killed that governor, They reference here 2 groups of faces, 7 in number. 7 of them are prisoners, and it is actually historically true that when the Bastille was raided, there were only 7 prisoners inside. So they released these 7 prisoners, and those people are, carried overhead, and they're scared and they're lost and they're excited. And of course, everybody is cheering for them. But then the other 7 faces have almost dead faces, drooping eyelids, and half-seen eyes, awaiting the last day. These are the guards. So 7 guards who have been badly beaten, about to die, are finally fully killed and then carried, beheaded through the streets. 7 prisoners released, 7 gory heads on pikes. So they've killed the guards, and they've also chopped off their heads, and they've put their heads on pikes, and they're all marching through the city. This actually happened. This is how bloody the revolution was. So, hearts such and such alike, the loudly echoing footsteps of Saint Antoine escort through the Paris streets in mid-July 1789. Now heaven defeat the fancy of Lucie Darnay and keep these feet far out of her life. So the fancy was that Lucie Darnay had a premonition about this. She thought something like this would happen. I think I also said over here somewhere, I put the date. Up here, Bastille Day is July 14th. That's the actual day that this happened. Sorry, I should have pointed that out before. So we need to pray for Lucie that nothing happens to Darnay, that he is able to escape all this violence. For they are headlong, mad, and dangerous, and in the years so long after the breaking of the cask at Defarge's wine shop door, they are not easily purified when once stained red. So it's been a long time since the beginning of the book, where they first have the spilled wine and the beginning of the revolutionary ideas were being, discussed. Now it's actually happening, and it's going to be incredibly bloody. So I just want you to recognize, a lot of times teachers will ask you as part of homework to find examples of similes and metaphors and personification, alliteration, sentence structure, diction, repetition. All of that is in this chapter. Together, those devices create a tremendous amount of drama and terror and also power. I mean, it really does show that the peasants have overpowered the aristocracy. There are many accurate references to the actual storming of the Bastille here, in terms of there were 7 prisoners, and the Bastille eventually did completely burn to the ground. I mean, it was completely destroyed by the peasants. And just be sure to annotate all of the details in here, because we have a lot has happened. Lucie has had 2 children. On little Lucie's 6th birthday, that's when this storming of the Bastille happens, right around that time. Also, there's been another child, George, who has died. Also, Sidney Carton is spending about 6 times a year visiting with the Darnays and Dr. Manette, and Lucie's children really like him. Mr. Stryver has gotten married to a widow with 3 children, and he brags about the fact that, Lucie had been chasing him, and he managed to put her off, which of course is ridiculous. So there's just a lot of sort of character catch-up going on in this chapter, along with the beginning of what will be the rest of this book, which is about the revolution in France.